let's talk about what happened over this cycle, because
Yeah.
like we say, we have these huge miners now, these huge public companies that have grown. They've grown so quickly. Like, what happened there? Why did we see that? Was it just by virtue of the fact that it was so profitable?
Yeah, so given that margins were so high, it made a ton of sense to do anything you could to get new machines and get them online. That was, the Marathon this time last year, they were raising hundreds of millions of dollars, making, billions of dollars actually, and investing hundreds of millions of dollars into mining machines. And the way they were able to get access to that capital was due to the profitability of mining. The margin was so thick that you could effectively run a mining machine anywhere. You could plug it in the kitchen over there, and it would probably produce, it'd produce $42 a day, and it would cost you maybe $10 to run.
And heat up your kitchen.
And your kitchen would be, 100 degrees. But now that same machine going to produce a little bit less Bitcoin, $8 or $9 worth of, probably going to produce $8 or $9 worth of Bitcoin, but your power cost is going to be a bit higher. And so now there's no margin to run those things. And so you have to be at, what we call grid scale. Which is where the pubcos are at today. So your Core Scientific, Argo, Riot, Clean Spark, Iris are all at massive scale.
And just explain again what grid scale means.
They're actually contributing to grid stability. So somebody like, let's use Riot as a good example. They're really the prototype for this type of miner. They're close to just under a gigawatt of total energy. A gigawatt is on a scale of like how much energy. That's a ton of energy. The Bitcoin network probably uses around 11 gigawatts right now.
So they're nearly 10%
of the total capacity. I don't know if they have that all plugged in,
right?
And if it's all mining Bitcoin. I don't know that specifically, but they're using that to do demand response. So in July of this year, power prices in ERCOT, which is the Texas grid, were through the roof. And it made way more sense for them to turn off their machines and sell back the power that they had been allocated through their power purchase agreement back to the grid. And so when they released their July mining report, it showed very little Bitcoin mined, but they had a caveat that we also made close to $11 million in reselling the energy that we had back to the grid. And so what that meant was the demand for energy was significantly higher than the supply for energy of energy on the grid. So they turned it off and allowed that supply to flow through.
Right. This ERCOT kind of case study that's been building in terms of grid stability with miners, is it happening anywhere else? Or is it just in Texas?
So they do. I mean, what it's called demand response or controllable load resourcing, and that is that's something that occurs on most grids. You get some incentive from the RTO to send that energy back into the grid rather than consuming it. And there are entire business models built around this. Factories.
But I mean specifically with miners.
Oh yeah, but miners, we think that miners use a ton of energy, but they don't actually use enough energy to really make a huge difference yet in grid stability. But they're getting there, right? They're building out tons and tons in Texas. Texas is around ERCOT's total generation capacity is around, last I checked, around 85 to 90 gigawatts, and they have it's called a demand delta of somewhere around 30 gigawatts. So we're actually getting to a portion of that under being controlled by mining machines, which you can, you start to see a bit of stability introduced, but we need to add, another 0 to the number of miners in Texas. So going from, a couple of gigawatts worth of energy to 20. And if at that scale, you would start to see significant grid stability, demand curve delta compression. The demand curve delta is the delta between the amount of demand at the peak and the amount of demand at the low, at the trough, and whatever that difference is, we can start to see that really compress. The reason that's beneficial, reduces strain on the grid, makes it a more efficient grid because you're not turning on peaker plants and things like that during those high amplitude moments.
Do you want to explain what a peaker plant is? I'm not sure everyone will know.
Oh yeah, a peaker plant is a natural gas. It's usually a natural gas generator, and the reason they call it a peaker plant is because it really makes it only makes sense to turn on when the peak demand is high and people are willing to pay more for energy. And they turn on quickly. They're generally, it's not as cheap to produce energy with them as some of the, the more stable base load generators like coal and nuke, but it can be profitable, and that's why they exist. And they're the ones that come in during that high demand portion of the of the day. Usually, if you're in Texas, it's probably midday when it's hot in the summers. Everybody has air conditioner on. Businesses are running. People are home turning on dryers and all of that stuff. And then in the middle of the night is when there's lowest demand, and coincidentally, that's when a lot of the wind kicks on, is in the middle of the night. So that's a time when you'd want to be mining, and all the peaker plants would be turned off and that sort of thing.
Okay, so a lot of these miners are now in distress, and there's a couple of things that stand out to me. I guess one of the difficult decisions miners have is when to sell the Bitcoin they've mined. I know a number of miners, ones I've spoke to, said straight up, we're not selling Bitcoin. We're not selling any of the Bitcoin we've got. But they were using the Bitcoin for collateral, or to take out loans to increase the size of their operations. So that's one thing that really stood out. But then also they were using the equipment as collateral to take out further loans. And it feels to me the one problem that seems to have hit the industry is I think everyone expected Bitcoin to peak at a much higher price. I don't think anyone I spoke to thought, if you said to them, this cycle, where do you think Bitcoin will peak? I don't think anyone would have said, around 60, 70,000. I think almost everybody expected we would hit over 100,000 of Bitcoin. I don't know why we didn't. You can come up with a number of reasons why we didn't, but we didn't. And it feels like perhaps what's become the problem for these miners is that they've, you never want to sell on the way down, right? So even when we hit 69 and we dropped, I think a lot of people felt it was going to come back. I mean, I did. Otherwise, I would have sold some Bitcoin. But now they've gone in a position where they don't know when to sell. And it feels like some have had to wait till almost the bottom to start selling off, and also to service their debts. And then even some of those now can't service their debts. Is there like a consistent issue, like a consistent set of problems that have hit these miners? Is it everything I've said? Is it something else?
It's certainly a confluence of events, things that you've mentioned. They're, even if they had that high debt load, if the margins had stayed high, they would have been able to service it. Even if Bitcoin price had gone down, maybe if difficulty had gone down with it, or we had seen more transaction fee volume, which would have increased hash price, miners would have been okay because the margins would have been high enough. So let's get into like the super basic economics of how some of these mining loans work. They're generally very aggressive amortization schedules, meaning you're financing over, say, 24 months. Imagine buying a car and if paying it off in 24 months, it's going to be a very high payment relative to the value of the loan. So if miners that have no debt are able to capture the bit of margin that they have, and then call that their free cash flow. Now, the miners that have debt, they take that operating income and then they have to service the debt. And that's really where we're seeing miners start to fold, is because of the extra amortization of the mining loans. So if I went and took out $100 million, or let's use even numbers. I took out $48 million. I have to pay $1 million a month. $2 million a month over the course, plus the interest on top of that. So if my operation makes, if I make $4 million and I have to pay $2 million,
happy days.
But then you have to pay the interest. Your free cash flow is now negative. So you're drawing from the balance sheet.
Hold on. If you got to pay $2 million plus interest, but you're making $4 million a month.
Well, you have to pay $2 million in energy prices.
Oh, okay.
And then you have to pay $2 million on your mining loan.
Yeah.
And then you have whatever other operating expenses that you have, plus the interest. You have what's called negative free cash flow, which means your mining operation, you have to draw cash from somewhere else. Either that's from your balance sheet or other operations that allow you to make income, but no longer is your mining operation producing free cash flow. And that becomes a very big problem. So that starts to trigger what are called covenants in these mining loans. And that's why we've seen big miners selling off batches of their machines, is they trigger some covenant with their lender where they have to reduce the overall exposure, either reduce the collateral, so they sell off some loans, pay back the debt early, or they go into a restructuring where, say, you tack on potentially a year or something like that to the note to reduce that expense, that end of the month debt payment.
Do you think some of these companies have been reckless? Have they been unlucky?
I think
I know you probably don't want to throw people under the bus.
I wouldn't throw anybody under the bus. I don't think none of them seem to have been egregiously reckless in my mind. Around this time last year, everybody thought that buy more machines. That's how you get a higher valuation. That's the equation. And so they were just doing what the market told them to do, and then the market obviously changed direction pretty significantly. And let's look at one of the highest debt load companies is Core Scientific. They have some unsecured debt, they have secured debt, and then the secured debt is the most senior, meaning the debt that would get paid back in a bankruptcy scenario would be the debt on the machines themselves. And so right now, they have something like, I think it's like 836 million in total debt outstanding.
So would the secured debt be the machines and the unsecured be the energy?
There's unsecured, which is not secured by anything. There's secured convertible notes, which is secured by anything that isn't any unencumbered mining machines. So if they owned them outright, or infrastructure, or assets what other assets on the balance sheet, PPAs, collateral posted for those PPAs, that would all be included in the secured debt. That's held in that secured debt.
Is unsecured likely something you're just going to pay a higher rate on because it's unsecured?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like if you went and took, imagine you went and took a $50,000 loan to buy Bitcoin with, and you didn't secure it with anything.
I see.
That would be an example of an unsecured loan. So that would be.
Well, it's a bit like if you go out and borrow against your Bitcoin, whatever your LTV is affects your rate.
But that's secured. That's secured, right?
But how much you're securing it affects the rate you pay.
Right. And these loans were generally between 20 to 50%. Generally, I would say the median would probably be around 30% LTV, meaning 30% of the value was you're holding about 30% of the value. So in the case of some of these loans, so for example, I wrote down here that that BlockFi lent CoreSci $52 million. That probably represents $150 million worth of around $150 million worth of total mining equipment that was purchased at, unfortunately, the peak, around the peak.
$10,000 a machine.
$10,000 a machine, $100. So that probably represents somewhere around 15,000 machines. It works. The numbers are actually nice and round if you kind of work into it that way. Works out to about 15,000 machines. And unfortunately, those 15,000 machines are depressed maybe probably about 80% since the loan was issued. And so during that time, I don't know, of course, I was making, if they were doing covenants or making good on their covenants to BlockFi. Most likely they were, meaning they sold Bitcoin or sold something to pay down a portion of the loan early. But that's what's putting pressure on these miners. That's just a very specific example of what's happening more ubiquitously across the entire public mining market.
Just on that point, when you take out a loan with a BlockFi, Ledger, any of these companies, you over collateralize and then you hit a margin call price. Right. I wonder if there are margin call prices on market prices for the machines.
Yeah, they do exist. A lot of times, there are contracts that actually use Luxor's hash price rig index. We go out and source the machine pricing across different models from around 35 different data sources and try to produce a reference rate for the value of a machine on any given day. And we have heard and have seen contracts that use that reference rate as the mark to market. So as you see the value of machines decreasing, the mark to market, the LTVs start getting skewed, and miners have to top up to pay that. And that's when I said covenants, that's effectively getting margin called based on the value of the collateral going down.